Good evening, everybody. If you'd like to take a seat, we can start the presentation on the history of the founding of Tuolumne River Trust. You'll get to meet me later, but for now, I'd like to introduce our panel of speakers for this reception: Joe Daly, John Amadio, and Amy Meyer, who are kind enough to agree to tell us stories about the not such old days. So let me turn this over to them.
Thank you, Harriet. The reason I think I have the microphone first is I came on the scene after the last ice age. And when we compared notes, I found out that I, as an outfitter, a river outfitter, in 1971 started rafting, and I started the river company in 1972. And so we were on the Stanislaus River and running there and got involved with trying to save the Stanislaus. And it was an amazing campaign. And we had a heart-wrenching battle, state initiative in 1974. And unfortunately, we were not able to save the Stanislaus, but it was the basis, I think, on which I got involved in the Tuolumne campaign, because we learned a lot in terms of what went well and what didn't go well on the Stanislaus, and we carried some of those lessons over to the Tuolumne. And the story of how we got moving on the Tuolumne, I think we'll tell a little later when we talk about Dale Crane and what happened there with Jerry Merrill. My time was basically starting in the 80s. We were running on the Tuolumne in the early 70s, but we knew politically we had to get serious in the early 80s. And so as an outfitter, I was involved from a business point of view, but frankly, you get personally caught up in these things. I mean, you can't ignore the beauty of the Stanislaus, and you can't ignore the beauty of the Tuolumne. And the next thing you know, it's more than a business. You're caught up in the cause. So we'll continue from there.
Thank you, Joe. I just want to kind of tag on that transition from Friends of the River, leading what was the most heartfelt grassroots campaign on the Stanislaus, and then the establishment of the Tuolumne Trust. Best analogy I can give, it's somewhat similar to that story of Adam giving a rib and creating Eve. And I think we would all the guys would admit we must have given our very best rib on that occasion. On this occasion, Friends of the River generously shared a number of their really best ribs in the establishment of the Tuolumne Trust. Some of them are here today, some of the very big ribs back there with Mark, and I don't see Alexander, I think he will be here, and Laurie McCann and Don Briggs, but they were central to our startup. I think, like Joe, were you an Easterner to begin with?
I was.
Yeah, I was an Eastern exile, having dropped out of college. And a hitchhiker gave me some very sound advice that, do you want to go back to school, natural resources, go to Humboldt State. And so I went up there in the early 70s and soon got involved in the effort to expand Redwood National Park. And then had the opportunity to head up a little environmental group called the North Coast Environmental Center. So how could you beat that for an education? So I dropped out of college. And those involvements required me actually to go to Sacramento, which I would have preferred not to. But I did, and there I soon discovered Friends of the River and their open door policy to all other eco-zealots, and came to really admire and love their passionate commitment and grassroots effort. A few years later, I was after we had succeeded in expanding Redwood National Park, I actually worked for the Sierra Club as their Northern California, Nevada wilderness organizer. Took me to Sacramento much more frequently, and I got to really know their hospitality, which consisted mostly of a hardwood floor, brown rice, vegetables, and unlimited ice cream. But they also invited me to speak at a few of their rallies, and I got very richly compensated, truly, when Alexander Gagin took me down the stunningly beautiful Stanislaus River and that particularly exquisite Rose Creek in its little Avon Redshank, and I will never forget that. But in 1981, I was contacted by someone spring of 81, I was working for a different grassroots group on Trinity Wilderness, and I got a call from someone I can only tell you is Deep Trout. Cannot give his name. He was in government, he's back in government, you can figure it out, I'm sure. Anyhow, he invited me to consider to be part of the startup of a new organization to protect the Tuolumne. And certainly I was familiar with the Tuolumne's role in kind of the early days of conservation and how the damming of its Hetch Hetchy Valley reputedly broke John Muir's heart. So I was intrigued, and so I came down and did a few of those, what you call two-way interviews to see if this was a good fit, and two stand out. And I don't know where he is now, but Bob Hackamack was here. Oh, hey, Bob. I went to Bob and Jean's house in Modesto. And Bob had already been, successfully leading efforts to protect the Tuolumne and had already managed to persuade the Forest Service that it should be designated as wild and scenic. Fortunately, that only gave us a 3-year window of protection, and we were down to about less than a year, about a year and a half, and Congress had to act, and there was not very favorable signs in the early 80s, Reagan is president and such. But what I knew in talking with Bob was that his knowledge of the river was such that the campaign would have the benefit of knowledge far beyond what our opponents could ever dream to have. He knew that system inside out. I then went down to meet with Marty McDonnell, one of the first commercial companies to run on the Tuolumne. Now, Marty was a passionate, yet very pragmatic guy, a bit of a hard-nosed way, actually, to be interviewed. He was sort of like, in baseball terms, he'd like to throw the equivalent of a couple brushback pitches to see whether you could stand in there. Now, someone who had been working, quote, behind enemy lines, what we called it in Humboldt County, I saw Marty as a critical local leader who would not be intimidated and who would stand for the river, even when the inevitable resentment and even scorn came from some of the locals who did not support it. So finally, I went down the river in a boat. Finally got to see this river. And I was with the inimitable Don Briggs, who I hope will be here. I don't know if he will. He's coming in? Okay. And we were the only boat to make it through Clavey Falls without flipping that day. I took that as a good sign. So this is a good omen. But truth be told, my redwood-honed sense of aesthetics didn't really connect with the Tuolumne Canyon so much. What convinced me to take the job, however, was that I enjoyed and admired the river community so much, most notably my fellow eco-warriors at FOR. I had this sixth sense that we could succeed. Now I got to say, of course, it did not hurt that FOR also stood for Friends of Romance in those days. So it's attracting a lot of young people. And I have to make one last point, because Deep Trout only 2 weeks ago told me that what clicked for him, the need to have a new group, was he was talking with Representative Phil Burton, who was the go-to guy, the guy you had to have if you were going to protect anything. And he had asked the Dale Crane, so what's Phil going to do for us on the Tuolumne? And he said, Phil's not going to do anything for you. He may not like the dam proposals, but that's his city that's proposing it. And it's just, you can't expect him to do anything on it. Now, if I'd known that, frankly, it wouldn't have changed anything, because I think I had a sense that Phil was such that we could bring him around. And in those days, I definitely had a sense that we could do anything if we really just committed ourselves to it.
I didn't realize it, but we're all East Coast transplants. I came from New York City with the Korean War doctors draft. My husband was drafted, and I came out here. I couldn't believe anything could be as beautiful as what I was seeing here. And after a while, I got involved with San Francisco's park system, but before that, I was involved with the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. So I got into conservation in 1970, and we had a campaign. Edgar Wayburn, who was once also one of the honorary board members of the Tuolumne River Trust, was the chair, and I was called co-chair of the GGNRA campaign. You, of course, right now are inside the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, and the Presidio is practically in the center of this park. But we had this incredibly lightning fast campaign, largely because of Phil Burton. And John expressed it just right. I mean, it was a question of getting Phil's attention, but Phil was, he could be turned with something like this. Ed Wayburn had worked on him very hard, and essentially, we have the huge park we do because Phil set things in motion that took a plan to save the Golden Gate in the first round. Instead of saving first 4, then 8, then 10, well, okay, we'll make it 25,000 acres, actually got up to 34,000 acres in the first round and is now an 80,000 acre park in 3 counties. So I came into this, and as a result, George Moscone appointed me to be on the San Francisco Recreation and Park Commission. And one day I get this call from this Amadio fellow, and he says, I want to come and talk to you. And I find I'm being recruited because what he wants is, first of all, San Francisco has this big dam up there, and they want to raise it. And he wants, first of all, that Camp Mather, the city's wonderful family camp in the Sierra, the people from there ought to want to help. And then how about all those other camps like Camp Tawonga, San Jose, and Berkeley, each of which contributed something to this campaign. So it was, I had seen the tea from the camp, and I sure got to love the tea. And it's been something so very special to be a part of this campaign.
Yeah, I have to apologize. I forgot to properly introduce Amy, and I think the best introduction is that she was so central to the creation of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area that the staff today simply called her Mom. Yeah. So when we kicked off this campaign, Yink Inc. is usually the holy grail of public interest campaigns. You want to get your name out there. You want to be known. Yeah, we purposefully chose the opposite. Till the midsummer, we started in the summer of '81. Till the midsummer of 1982, the trust purposely kept a low profile. We chose to clandestinely build a strong, wide-based organization. We methodically grew an umbrella association with a powerfully diverse board of directors. And the reason was simple. We needed to first build our organization and develop our themes and basic strategies in order to come out strong and with momentum. Because we knew once we were visible, we had some very powerful enemies who would had many more resources than we could ever hope to. So organizationally, our pillars were the river community, specifically commercial outfitters, FOR's great grassroots network, as well as experienced Sierra Club leaders like Bob Hackenbach and Alvin Greenberg, who was our original board chairman. And we quickly supplemented them with 3 of the most prominent Bay Area environmental leaders, notably Ed Wayburn, who was president of Sierra Club, the legendary David Brower, who was then leader of Friends of the Earth, and Amy Myers, as mom of the GGNRA. We were then fortunate to recruit several regional leaders of national conservation groups, notably Patty Hedge, who's here tonight, Patty Emmons now of the Wilderness Society, Greg Thomas of the Natural Resources Defense Council, as well as Hope Babcock, who sort of became my mom in D.C., putting me up there for extended periods. And we were then fortunate to recruit several, after that, still we knew we needed an even broader, deeper base to succeed. We had sort of taken an ecosystem approach. We wanted to identify and recruit every organization that either was a beneficiary or loved the Tuolumne the way it was then. And soon our board included, as Amy said, the City of Berkeley and San Jose family camps, as well as the United Jewish Community Center's Camp Tawonga. And that really expanded our reach. And then we got major recreational fishing organizations, notably Cal Trout, and I'm delighted to see, I call him its wizened leader, Richard May, who contribute mightily, and Federation of Fly Fishermen. And then we went out to community folks. We got this immensely appealing, everyone's image of a grandmother, Rosa Gwynn, from the tiny hamlet of Hardin Flat, which was going to be inundated by the proposals by the city of San Francisco and Turlock and Modesto irrigation districts. And we sort of rounded out. Well, we didn't quite round out. We brought on some strong individuals who brought unique resources. We'll tell you the story. Joe will tell you the story of one of those, Maurice Holloway, owner of Corn Nuts, and then Scooch Pankinen, who was the outfitter lobbyist from D.C., who not only opened doors to many very conservative members of Congress — she was from Idaho and had gone there with a Republican member of Congress — but he opened her townhouse, which was 2 blocks from the Capitol, for endless gatherings, including one with over 100 guests. And a little thing she and I ran over the course, we called it pasta politics. We would invite in 1 or 2 people and make them a great meal and build a relationship. I cooked, she provided all the beverages. Still, we decided we needed more diversity and sought out unlikely allies that would enhance our credibility. And to the dismay, if not anger, and in fact there was anger of several of our key supporters, including one of my best friends, we purposely recruited 2 Central Valley conservationists who had opposed protecting the Stanislaus, but now supported wild and scenic tea. This to us suggested others should take a second look at the tea. And one of them, Don Moyer, regional governor of Caltrout, made some very significant contributions. But even more powerful than the breadth of our organizational support was the quality of the individual board members. You know, a rule of thumb in nonprofit organizations is that you want board members that have 2 of the 3 W's: wealth, wisdom, or work. Well, wealth was kind of hard to come by, but I can tell you this: our board's predominant strength was their wisdom and willingness to work, but they also contributed very generously. Now, finally, as a theme and strategy, we took our time assessing our opponents and how to best frame and present our case. And ultimately, we crafted a very basic theme of balance and fairness. We distilled the complexity, which the dam lovers love to get you tangled up in, and to the very simple reality that at that point, 90% of the tea's development value had already been harnessed. Yet miraculously, the remaining free-flowing miles sustained an unmatched array of recreational and natural values. Now, we knew our theme had taken root and we could go public when a statewide magazine, I think it was called California, I forget, I don't think it's in existence now, had as its cover story on the Tuolumne in the summer of 1982, the very Sinatra-esque, if there's such a word, Frank Sinatra could have sang this, their cover was, "Why Not Take All of Me?" And that's the theme we wanted. We were really kind of presenting ourselves as the true conservatives, keeping things the way they were, and we're serving many, as opposed to, frankly, some greedy folks who wanted to have all the benefits to themselves. Now, Joe and Amy can add in on this.
I want to say something about that board. It was the most remarkable, the most intelligent board I've ever served on. The people had such a variety of skills, and they complemented each other, and they didn't fight, and they were all of us were working in the same direction. So we simply harnessed whatever we had to make the campaign move in a forward direction. And it was such a pleasure to work with these people. We knew different legislators. We knew members of the Board of Supervisors. We knew congressmen. And we each worked with what we knew. And that helped to move this campaign forward in a way that it powerhoused. I love John's story about the kind of optimism that pervaded this board, because it was such an uphill, I mean, looking at the bottom, you were looking up at that dam and you were looking, it was going to be difficult. And yet there was never that sense of, you know, we can't beat it. We will beat this. We will make people see it and understand that the Tuolumne is a special place, and I do agree very much with what Joe and John have said, that it was the battle for the Stanislaus that in some ways became the example of, you know, how not to do that, not to have that happen again, and how would we do it and prevent it. And I'm just so thankful for all the very good people who worked on this.
The importance of having this low profile initially and going after the diversity shows up when you recognize what the other side was planning. The other side was planning to paint us as the wild-haired radicals who would be out there, just kind of a fringe element in society. And they were going to provide power, and this is nearly $1 billion project. And so they were going to put us in a corner that wouldn't leave us much room to operate. And so by not revealing what we were doing in terms of having a broad spread for our board membership and a broad spread in terms of the appeal that we were trying to make, it helped us get started, as opposed to being in a defensive posture of having to say, we're not wild-haired, crazy rafters. I mean, we were, but some of them were. But we had to have a wider reference than that. And so I'm thinking that what was interesting about that is that one of the early things that we had to do was try to come up with money. Not easily done. And of course, as outfitters, we were approached, what can you contribute? And so it was a little tricky in the sense that we were approached saying, won't you help us, but please take a low profile. Be invisible, but give us some money. And yet, I think the outfitters recognized where things were, that it was a very painful loss with Stanislaus. I mean, it was a sweet, sweet river. So many people could start their boating career on a river that wasn't going to terrify them, and it was painful to lose that. And we all of us who were on the Tuolumne had been on the Stanislaus, and so we knew kind of how important it was to not lose a second river. And so we, during the Stanislaus campaign, contributed $1 a user day for the campaign, and we looked at each other in the Tuolumne campaign and said, we've got to do a lot more. And so we ended up in the thick of that campaign donating $5 per user day on the Tuolumne, and that helped us, and it hasn't been done since. I mean, the Grand Canyon had to do something where they ended up doing 10 cents a user day. Now, granted, the Grand Canyon has many more user days and many more people, but I can't think of another time when that percentage of the money was devoted to a cause as the $5 per user day on the Tuolumne. And that helped get us started in terms of the early days with John. But we had other things to help, and maybe I'll let you talk about Lori and some of the donations we got.
Sure. One thing we just regularly did was we took leaps of faith, and we just had to. They took a leap of faith in hiring this guy they didn't know from the North Coast. This next one was not much of a leap of faith in the sense that the person who we hired, Laurie McCann, was very well known. She was, had been very strongly involved with Friends of the River, had really demonstrated some real skills in fundraising. So brought Laurie on very early, and she immediately went to work, and he very quickly started paying dividends with getting foundation grants from the Columbia Foundation, San Francisco Foundation, one of our angels throughout, the Richard and Rhoda Goldman Fund. And she kept building on that. And then, after we came out in the summer of '82, she put together, helped spearhead do you want to talk about a coming out party? This was at one of the glitziest, newest hotels in San Francisco, the Meridian. And we honored Richard and Rhoda Goldman, who were, they're fabulous people and well-connected. Judge Newsom, who's similarly brought in a whole group of people we could never reach. And then Richard Chamberlain, the actor, who Don Briggs had sort of taken down the river and had made himself available to us. And there's a few people here who would remember that Richard Chamberlain was sort of the heartthrob of America at the time. Everybody wanted a piece of Richard Chamberlain, and he lived a pretty private life. But he came out and made himself available to us. That made it quite exciting. And we also honored, as I called him from my Italian culture, Bob Hackenmack as the godfather of the tea on that occasion. Not in the old gangsterish ways, but the very kind of, taking care of somebody and taking them under their wings. That was Bob throughout. So we did some good fundraising and made a big difference.
There were a couple of other people. One was marvelous help from a very urban, very respected organization, SPUR, the San Francisco Planning and Urban Research Association, whose executive director, Mike McGill, turned out to be an avid fan of the Tuolumne. And I think one of the others must tell this story, though, but a man named Maurice Holloway and all of his contributions.
Maurice is a very modest fellow, and he was on the board early on, and so we had the flow of money was up and down. There were some months where it was good and some months when we were wondering where the next money is coming from. And I remember 3 months in a row when we would start the board meeting with, how do we pay John this month? And there'd be this long pause. And I'd look at my shoes and people would stare around, and Maurice would go, I'll cover his salary for this month. Next month, next meeting, same routine. Maurice goes, I'll cover his salary for this month. He did that 3 times, along with many other things, but that's the kind of board member that you want to just thank and thank and thank. It was a very special moment because instead of having to kind of claw our way forward, we could go forward with a positive momentum, keep John fed.
And I was eating more than brown rice and veggies at that point. I was living in San Francisco and discovered the rich Italian delis, so I was kind of costly. Want we start on media? Yeah. Okay. The next thing we want to touch on was our media outreach, because now once we came out, we wanted to be everywhere. So we wanted to just raise the profile. And there was a couple things we did that proved very successful. We were very fortunate at that time. There was a nonprofit of professional public relations people who only worked with nonprofits called the Public Media Center. And I think Laurie was the first one who mentioned them, and we reached out to them. There were some very brilliant people there, Herb Gunther, Jerry Mander, whose book you should, several of his books are really worth reading. And they helped us craft a direct mail campaign that began to rapidly build our own membership. They also helped us kind of dress ourselves up so, such things as this, which was at the time a very fancy packet for opinion leaders. And so we started to take on project this image that was frankly way more substantive and deep pocket than we ever had. But it certainly helped open doors and helped open some minds. So that was very key. Now, I wish Don Briggs were here because I'd like him to hear the stories, because Don, some of you know Don well, he had been central in the Stanislaus campaign, and he put himself forward just volunteering, basically, in this campaign. And Don, in this season of baseball, I would say, was sort of, I used to call him the Reggie Jackson of our effort, because if you remember Reggie, he'd go for the long ball. And when you go for the long ball, yeah, you're going to strike out a lot. But when you connect, it's a thing of beauty. And what Don did, I mean, he would work on people so persistently that if he wasn't a charming, nice guy, they would have written him off as obnoxious. Because he was charming and nice, I think on a few occasions they just said, what's he want? Give it to him. Look, come on, let's help him. And so he got us on, the McNeil-Lehrer national television. He got us on with Richard Chamberlain kind of starring Going Down the River on CBS Sunday Morning with Charles Kuralt. There were several other national things. And once you start to get some national hits, then other media pick up on it. And, I have to tell you, it wasn't long until the Tuolumne was, we at this point were competing to be part of this, was the historic, largest wilderness bill ever in the lower 48 states, California Wilderness Bill that Phil Burton was putting together. And we were rising to the point where it really became the most prominent element within that bill. And that media work really made a big difference. I would just touch on one other thing. Richard Chamberlain, I mean, he was a gold mine to us. I remember meeting, Richard when he came to testify in Washington, D.C., and several of us had written, a statement for him that I thought would hit all the, important points. And he kind of came in and sort of modestly said, I kind of wrote something on the plane. You mind if I read it? It was poetry. It was so beautiful that publications, Washington Post, San Francisco Chronicle, they started to run it verbatim because it was such a sincere, from the heart testimony. It turns out that he got introduced as a young man to the Tuolumne because it was his grandfather's favorite fishing river. And he talked about how he'd traveled the world, but never until he returned to the Tuolumne had a place captured his heart like this. And I can tell you, Richard had a few fans. And that certainly, made a huge difference in elevating us. He was extremely generous with his time. And in fact, I have here, I think, a publication that one of the Republican congressmen who came aboard, because we were adamant on being bipartisan, one of his publications that featured, guess who? Richard Chamberlain, sitting there, with the congressman. So he could, any place he went. Last thing I'll mention about Richard was that the Washington Post, which is, of course, read by all the members of Congress, and where if you can get in there, you're going to get to the opinion, to the decision makers. On one occasion, when he came to Washington, the second most read section of the Post after this inside page on the politics of the day was the Washington Scenes section, kind of, if you will, the celebrity section. And he only agreed to do an interview with them if he could, talk specifically about the Tuolumne. And they were happy to have it. They ate it up, and, there we were. Once again, front page. Who is this? What is this place? Oh. Any thoughts on the media?
I didn't have to do with that.
That's
Yeah?
fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where are we now?
We're on to the Burton.
Okay, I get to talk about one of my favorite things. One of my heroes, one of my mentors, Congressman Phil Burton. Okay, we're gathered here today inside Golden Gate National Recreation Area. Certainly some of the most spectacular.
Yeah, well, this was, let's say at first that this was Phil's park back in 1972, and the additions he made in 74, 78, 1980. He was, with this park, and his skill in getting congressmen of any stripe to work with him. One of the things that I liked when I tell people about our campaign was, he and Bill Maillard, who was the congressman from this district, a liberal Republican, would go and have a drink together every night. Phil would go down to Bill's office, apparently take off his shoes, wander around in his socks. They'd have a drink together, and the joke was that at that point, Phil would start calling any living president. But it was a companionable, bipartisan feeling, and this is what pervaded this campaign and made such a difference. It's so different from what we're experiencing right now.
Amy knows that the GGNRA is only here due to the vision and political genius of Phil Burton. In the short period from 1977 through 1982, he is credited with the preservation of more public lands than anyone other than Teddy Roosevelt in the history of our country. Now, what's really interesting is it's this amazing burst of creativity resulted only after he suffered a stunning defeat that many thought would end his political career. He was on the leadership ladder, heading to be Speaker of the House, and he ran to be Majority Leader, and people thought he had it in the bag. He thought he had it in the bag. He wouldn't have people talk to other members because he said, no, they said they're going to vote for me. Don't leave them alone. He ended up losing by one vote to the much more conservative gentleman from Texas. Jim Wright, exactly. So thankfully, at this point, until this point, Burton had really been focused, GGNRA being a very significant exception. Well, that's true. But until this point, he got defeated in January of 77. So before he took on Redwoods, he had done the GGNRA, but he had been primarily focusing on, social justice, labor.
And labor and education.
Labor education. I mean, he was the man. In fact, you want to read a great political biography, read A Rage for Justice. I mean, you will not believe this man. But anyway, he pivoted, and thankfully he then chose natural resources as the arena to reestablish his leadership role and to perhaps climb back up the ladder. So by 1981, he had put together an unlikely alliance that had expanded Redwood National Park, by far the most costly park acquisition in our country's history. And then in what became dubbed Burton's Park Barrel Bill, he had crafted and passed a nationwide parklands bill that combined very popular local parks that the local congressman wanted with some of the most contentious park acquisitions that never would have passed on their own. But the local congressman wanted what their local park, they had to buy into the big, tough stuff. So in '82, stunningly, all of a sudden, he was in a serious risk of losing his seat here in San Francisco. The National Republican Committee made him target number one to defeat that year. They recruited a very popular, moderate liberal Republican, Milton Marks, to challenge him. Polls were showing Marks was up by 15%. Burton was vulnerable, actually, for two reasons. And frankly, both of them of his own making. One, he had been the genius who had redrawn all the political lines in California for the 1980s. And in an act of brotherly love, he gave up the safest part of his district to his brother John, took on the most conservative parts of San Francisco. And then the other thing, he was so absorbed in Congress, and he simply believed that, hey, if I'm doing the Lord's work, I'm going to be recognized. He had only spent 9 days here in San Francisco in that previous year, and all of them he stayed in a hotel. So, they were attacking him for that. So we knew if we lost Burton, our prospects would dim significantly. As the next most powerful California congressman was Tony Coelho, who literally represented the dam proponents in Congress. In fact, Coelho's power was because he was brilliant at raising money. He was the head of the Congressional Campaign Committee. And excuse my cynicism, but frankly, I always thought that Coelho was the one who figured out and went to the corporate money interests and said, look, if you can rent access from one party, why not rent it from both? And that's what they did. They started to invest equally in both parties. And politics in America changed. I mean, corporate money and influence became much more significant. Any event, we mobilized the river community to an unprecedented level. And did so in some innovative ways to maximize our influence and visibility. Of course, we raised money. We had to. And again, the outfitters stepped forward. And they made the maximum legal allowable donation. And then in a letter signed by Mark, Tim McKay, a prominent North Coast environmentalist, and myself, we reached out to all the possible donors we could find in the grassroots community. And we raised significant funds. Fun part is that we had them send a check, make out the check to Tuolumne River, Siskiyou Mountains, care of Phil Burton. So they always knew where this money came from. And then rather than simply turning the money over to the campaign, we subsidized three really remarkable individuals, Alexander Gagin, who you've heard of, Robert Canning, and Nene Redway. And they virtually lived at Burton's campaign headquarters. They comprised the core of his field operations, which were to prove the difference in the victory he finally won. And we also carefully invested in attending several fundraisers where we could prominently display the river community's role. One of these, we sent three of us to a very small, I think 20 or 24 person fundraiser hosted by Mayor Feinstein's husband. And then on another case, we sent a delegation to his major fundraiser featuring Ansel Adams. And at Burton's behest, we donated $5,000, the maximum you could, to Assemblyman Rick Lehman, who was running for Congress in a newly drawn district designed by Burton for Rick Lehman. This looked like a telephone receiver. Started off in Fresno, crossed the Sierra, went up, picked up Mono Lake and about 400 people who lived over there, crossed the Sierra and picked up Tuolumne County again. So here was Rick going to be representing some of the most valuable and in-play resources in California. Burton won. And in true Burton-esque style, he exuberantly acknowledged our role on election night. You know, he was virtually shouting with his eyes bulging out, "I got the cops, I got the gays, I got labor, and I got the enviros. Ain't that a bitch?" That was Phil Burton. Tragically, he died 6 months later, and it was. So while he was not there to do what only he could do, that effort was not lost. First, we had elevated the Tuolumne and the river community to the broader political leadership. So they knew that we could deliver and were a force to be respected. And probably more important, when his wife Sala succeeded him, she knew what we had done for her beloved Philip, and they were just close as can be. And she also knew what Philip had committed to us after the election. We'll tell more about that in a little bit. And so while initially unknown to us, Sala delivered in a way that certainly had Phil smiling wherever he was. And as you will hear later, Rick Lehman easily won and was to develop his profile and encourage himself in supporting the Tuolumne, Mono Lake, and some of the more important wilderness areas. No, this is you. Will you comment on this?
No, I'm just going to
You
make
guys
a comment.
were involved in the-
I'm just going to comment here. I was going to just make a quick comment about being in the small community. I grew up in a village in upstate New York of about 1,500 people, and it was not easy to make a political statement. And so when Marty McDonnell and Rick Lehman and others had to, in these smaller communities of Sonora and in the surrounding areas, come forward and make a statement, it really took a lot of personal courage to do that. And that was an important part of the campaign as well. So you had sort of the big city politics of the Bay Area, but you had the regional foothill politics going on too. And many people need to have the tip of the hat in their direction for the courage they had to step forward in these smaller locales.
You want me? Yeah, okay. One of the main things was to turn San Francisco from being a proponent of a higher dam at Hetch Hetchy, and this involved getting to the Board of Supervisors, getting the kind of support that environmentalists can give in this city, but also to do it in a very even respectable way that also helps to move some of the legislators. And that's where Spur came in particular, but also Sierra Club, and where all kinds of work was done to get the city to change its position. Now, the problem that John hands me the microphone, but in all truth, John, I was not the detail person on this. I helped, I worked on it, but that's, it was just a matter of going and meeting with people over a long period of time. Some of the details are simply not there.
Mom is also modest because she helped to open doors to, there was, what was it, 11 supervisors? 11 supervisors, and so there's a lot of ground to cover. And you got to remember, San Francisco is entitled to half the development rights. They weren't going to get any of the electricity, but they were going to get $27 million a year if these dam complexes were being built. So it wasn't something you walk away from easily. You want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to add one more thing in terms of as you approach a city like San Francisco to try to turn them around, you come from many directions. And when you can walk in and say, the Dean Witter Foundation has given us money, Tides has given us money, Columbia has given us money, Maurice Holloway, the Goldmans, San Francisco Foundation, it makes them take pause and go, maybe I better pay attention.
So a couple things on turning San Francisco. We had people who knew all of the supervisors, and they went to them, and there's nothing better than that peer-to-peer personal, and that made a difference. But then we also did something that had never been done before. The California League of Conservation Voters, based here in San Francisco, we worked with them to actually do a door-to-door canvas campaign in which we would target, the individual supervisors, and they would get a rush of letters. So between them being visited by people they knew and respected, and then hearing from their constituents, they ended up not just turning, they flipped. They went unanimously in support of Wild and Scenic. And this was after we lost Phil, so it was very huge. Anyway, one of the last things we're going to touch on before kind of having just a few closing comments and having questions is kind of some of the political nitty-gritty. You know, I told you we kept low key until the summer of '82 when time was running out on our interim protection. And then we, you know, made our first pitch to Congress that the expiring interim protection should be extended so Congress could decide the fate of the river. Otherwise, it was going to be left to a clearly dam-oriented Federal Power Commission. And our proposal got embraced by both Alan Cranston, who was always a champion, and a very conservative Republican, S.I. Hayakawa. But time ran out before it could be enacted. So 1983 brought major challenges. First, the interim protection expired. As anticipated, Modesto and Turlock Irrigation District with San Francisco sought approval of a $1 billion dam complex. Phil Burton had died. We were without, you know, our essential leader. And I got to tell you, the Burton no commitment. After the election, you know, Phil had called me in and he said, "What do you guys want? What is it?" And I said, "You know, it's really simple. We want Wild and Scenic designation. Nothing less. No more studies. Can't kick it down the road. We got to get it done." And he kind of said, "Okay, I'll take care of the House if you get Pete Wilson's support." Now, Pete Wilson had just been elected, Republican mayor from San Diego. And many people thought this would be mission impossible because first, he had beaten the environmentally endorsed candidate, some former governor, Jerry somebody, I think, yes. He had beaten Jerry Brown. And secondly, his margin of victory came from the very Central Valley, which were the proponents of the dam. So we had no choice. We had to work them, and we devised a threefold strategy for Wilson, but, you know, applying it to others as well. The first would persuade them that the broad public interest would best be served by maintaining the existing balance of uses, you know, and that could be done only through Wild and Scenic. Our diverse association spoke to that. But perhaps, you know, most powerfully speaking to that was something Richard Chamberlain had said, and that was echoing. And I'm going to quote, he said, "To my eyes, God seemed to have lavished a special abundance of living gifts on the river. We have the power to destroy it, but never, never in our wildest imagination can we ever recreate it." So that had taken root, that, you know, the Wild and Scenic would maintain benefits for many, otherwise, you know, we would be profiteering for a small number. Secondly, we wanted to persuade them that Californians overall overwhelmingly supported preserving the river. And that happened. He got more letters on the Tuolumne River in his first year in office than any other issue before him. And again, our association all contributed to that. They had kids writing at camp. You know, I don't know what you fishermen did, but, you know, I'm sure you wrote a few letters. But Friends of the River particularly stepped up with the outfitters. They had a on-river program where they would, you know, give a lunch talk and have paper and pencil and ask people to write. I'm told that some of the guys went so far that they would give an extra beer to anyone who wrote a letter. Your profits were down, I know, but our letters were up, Joe. It worked. And then lastly, and kind of a bit of a twist, we wanted kind of Wilson to also be really comfortable that some of his major supporters were with us. They knew it. So we created a Republican Friends of the Tuolumne. And we had genuine Republicans as the leaders. We had some Peter Baer.
You had Ed Wayburn, for one, because Phil Burton persuaded him not to change his Republican registration so that he could speak even for the GGNRA as having Republican support. But also, you probably don't know this, but the relationship between Wilson and Spur, that there was a lot of feeling in Spur that Wilson, they were more comfortable with Wilson than they were with Jerry Brown. And here was this San Francisco organization standing up for the Tuolumne.
So we did. We also had the chairman of the Republican State Party. We had Ike Livermore, I think, a major Republican. But no, actually, William Penn Mott, who had been Governor Reagan's Parks director, and we got Wilson's list of major donors, and we carefully selected 1,000 of them in strategic congressional areas. And this guy, Mark Reisner, another great book, he wrote Cadillac Desert, a brilliant book about the American West and water. He crafted this letter for them that, just truly spoke that conservation is a conservative value, and we should be standing up for this. And Joe, you might want to tell about the orange bag.
Yeah, right. It turns out Senator Wilson was sensitive to sort of the business community, and I can't remember what angle we used as business outfitters, but somehow we got into his office to talk with his chief of staff for California, Sally Rackow, right? And we're in there, we're making our pitch about why the facts from the other side were a little lopsided. And she got so caught up in the information that we were giving her that she just blurts out, "I need to orange bag this to Washington." Now, I have no idea what an orange bag is, but it must have been something you put on an airplane each day that goes to D.C. and goes straight to the Senate chambers. But the point that came through was that he needed some sort of business hook, and we were faintly business as outfitters. We were faintly business oriented, and that helped. But also the logic of what we were saying, it began to give her, Sally, the chance to say, the credibility here of what the other side is saying is at stake. And that helped because we were very careful about our numbers, very careful about our facts, and I think that helped persuade them. One of the things that was so hard in terms of getting through to Senator Wilson was the fact that as a good politician, a good politician is always looking for a compromise. I mean, compromise is just the word they love. Can you do this? Can you do that? Can you? They kept asking us, can you have a takeout that's farther upstream? Can you have this? Can we lower the dam? Can we go over here? Can we do this? And they were just tinkering. And we kept saying, this is an all or nothing deal. I mean, you're either going to save this river or you're not. And they went for months and months and months trying to come up with the magical compromise, and it wasn't there. It was one of those points where they had to be courageous and step forward, and Senator Wilson finally did. And I remember in the hearings, when Senator Wilson was asked at one point in the subcommittee hearings, somebody said, "Are you working with Senator Cranston on this?" And Senator Wilson said, "We're practically going steady."
Okay, a couple quick wrap-ups, and then I'll give just a few final thoughts. Wilson came on board. It was a beautiful sight, February '84. He and Alan Cranston standing together, unveiling this historic compromise, California Wilderness Bill, including the Tuolumne and Mono Lake. Wasn't over. Tony Coelho announced, "I eat freshman senators for breakfast." A couple months later in May, he has a big hearing. It's America, can always do new and improved. They dropped their dastardly dam proposal. They came up with the new improved Ponderosa Golden Rock project that somehow magically was going to enable them to still capture the hydro, enhance all the recreational uses. We looked at it and had to say, if Congress buys this, they better rename it the Wild and Scenic Ditch System. And Coelho was not happy. At that hearing, he overplayed his hand so badly. Rosa Gwynn, he seemed to be bullying her. The chairman of the subcommittee was so embarrassed that I've never seen this. He went up afterwards and apologized to her. The next day, we had other witnesses, memorable testimony. I'm just going to quickly tell you of two. One was Joe's, because a lot of people didn't understand whitewater, cubic feet per second. What's the difference if you got 1,200 or 800 cubic? Oh, you missed. We talked about you earlier. But that's Laurie McCann. So Joe came up with this brilliant analogy, because a lot of people knew skiing. And I don't think you realize maybe that Cyberling's chief aide, Andy Wiesner, his dad was an Olympic skier from Austria, and he was a big-time skier. So he came in and he says, well, 5,000 cubic feet per second is kind of like the thrill of a lifetime, helicopter skiing in British Columbia. 2,500 cubic feet per second is like the blue sky, perfect powder day, Utah. 1,250 feet per second.
Not so good.
No, well, yeah, it was, yeah, it's a good, it's a good, my son gave me the words for this because he knows skiing. What was it? It was, I don't know, it was a good day for skiing. Hard pack, yes, which is what they mostly ran at in the summer. 1,000 feet is kind of, you start to get, mix of ice patches and slushy areas. At 800, which is what they were proposing, Joe said, you might as well take your skis off and walk down the mountain.
It got through to them.
It did get through to them. So Coelho's last play, he couldn't beat us on substance. He showed he was utterly exasperated. He berated his own people at the hearing and started yelling, "You are spending millions of dollars, and yet they are out PRing you." And that was, I thought, one of the greatest compliments, because they were spending millions. They were spending more each month on lobbying than we spent in the campaign. So his final play was to try and decouple the Tuolumne from the wild and scenic. And he did this in two ways. First, he went, he was good on wilderness. And he went to a couple of the Sierra Club and Wilderness Society chief lobbyists in Washington, and they collared us and said, "Hey, you're going to take down the whole California wilderness bill. Coelho's he's going to take it down if you don't separate the T out. You can't do this to us." And we said, our community is supporting wilderness 100%. We expect the same. We're not going to do it. It's our time. We're not going to go away. We know what happens if we do. So then his last play was to go, even after it passes out of committee, there's a final rules committee that determines how things will be debated on the floor of the House, whether they'll allow amendments, which Coelho wanted, because if he could strip out the Tuolumne, we'd be vulnerable, or not. Sala Burton stepped up so big. She went to go visit the speaker, Tip O'Neill, and the story I'm told, I wasn't there, but I can believe it, is that Sala actually literally sat in Tip O'Neill's lap, and she told him that this was Phil's legacy. He had tried 3 previous Congresses, passed it in the House, always got stopped in the Senate, and that Phil had promised that he would deliver the Tuolumne if we had Senator Wilson's support, and she intended to see that promise fulfilled. Done deal. Came to the floor of the House. Tony Coelho, the only thing he did was when it came time for a voice vote, raised his hand yes in favor. So he went with it. So we're going to have just maybe a couple minutes of final perspective.
Oh. Well, my part of this perspective is what I see as I receive information from the Tuolumne River Trust. What a pleasure to have Susan Stern be the head of the organization now, coming from Camp Tawonga. And where this was once a Bay Area-centered group with some friends along the river and the outfitters, today, with the sense I get, is that all along the river, projects using the river, educating about the river, the Tuolumne in my tap, these different projects, and above all, the paddle to the sea. What a wonderful thing it is to connect the whole river down from Groveland to the Bay. It's just so exciting that this is done every year. And it's people who have made this possible. I guess that's the biggest thing about this. They told you some wonderful war stories. There are stories they told that I didn't know. But the idea that it's been people working very steadily, optimistically, but absolutely accurately that got this through. And how wonderful it is for all of us.
I was just going to mention the chemistry of the group. We were lucky that way. It was not something that we built. It sort of came as a bonus, a benefit, that we, as individuals, brought experience. We brought some wisdom, some wealth, some work. But when you put it all together and mix the stew, the chemistry that resulted was very special, and it just doesn't happen every time. We were lucky. The other thing is that there is unfinished business. I'm sure Eric knows very well that there's unfinished business. There's the Clavey to be made in Wild and Scenic. Bob Hackamat is suggesting the North Fork of the Tuolumne. But many things to be done, and the educational programs that you have going, and that sweep from the headwaters to the bay is a great concept. And to have the involvement with Modesto that we have now, it wasn't possible during the political days. But it's great to see this as a watershed project. Wonderful.
couple of comments. One on the broad conservation impact. In 1981, the Tuolumne was designated the most endangered river in the country by American Rivers. 1984, when it was added to the system, they declared it was the most significant addition since the creation of the Act, and the first one since President Reagan. It kind of broke the logjam. And to have Friends of the Rivers credit, they then ran a series of brilliant campaigns to add many other California rivers to the system. So, you know, they really carried on and expanded that reach. Why I think it succeeded ultimately? You know, I think of it in two ways. One, Lincoln's, united we stand, divided we fall. This group hung together. They tried to peel us off. They tried to say, okay, river runners, we can do this, but it won't be so good for the camps. They did the reverse. It didn't work. And then I remember Alan Cranston. We had this private lunch with him, with Richard Chamberlain, and Richard Chamberlain asked him, so I don't get this. How is it that you do this political work? It's so hard. It's nasty. And Cranston pulled out of his wallet a quote he carried with him. I think it was a Truman quote, and it simply said, there's no telling how much good you can do if you don't care who gets the credit. And I think that was the attitude in our group. Now, most important to me ultimately, the most profound lasting thing was the most personal. And I have to I have to acknowledge the original board treasurer, Patty Emmons, who, I don't know if she knew what she was doing, but she introduced me to her gorgeous daughter, Katie. And she's here tonight with her two wonderful children, Lily, who's already a certified river guide, and Beppe, who aspires to be one. So without the tea in this great campaign, I wouldn't have this family. So I can't say anything more than that. And Wednesday, we celebrate our 25th anniversary. Thank you. I don't know if we have time or for questions. We've got 5 minutes. Any questions? That's a sign of either really good or really bad.